Hey, this is Nick from Man from Soul, and today I'm going to show you some more basic glitch sound design techniques. The techniques I'm going to be showing you in this one are mostly relying on a plugin called Harmor. It is pretty unique. It's made by ImageLine. If you do not have access to it, this tutorial might still be pretty useful for you in terms of learning some general techniques and paradigms that you might be able to apply to other time scrubbing related plugins that you might own. Um, I will, even though Harmor can do a lot of really crazy, insane stuff, I'm also going to be using it for time scrubbing, and I'll go into detail on that in a second. Okay, so I actually recorded quite a bit of stuff, and then OBS crashed on me, so I'm going to kind of go over briefly what I've done so far. If we go over to our drum section, we have a bunch of, we made a drum loop, and out of a bunch of samples from the Glitch with Friends Samples Volume 1 sample pack. I'll put a link to this in the description, but this is the sample pack that kind of kickstarted the whole glitch.cool project. So if you don't know what I'm talking about, just click the link and you will be able to get a bunch of really crazy cool samples, including everything I used here, and a bunch of other really neat stuff that I and my friends design. So let's get to it. So what I did is I played this, this is a drum loop, and then what I did, I recorded it using Edison, and then I dumped it into Harmor. So this is what the loop sounds like. So as far as the drum loop goes, it's moderately interesting. It's all right. And so, I mean, the rhythm isn't like perfect or whatever, but it'll work for what we want to do. And what we want to do is we want something with like a lot of texture in order to be able to glitch it out and still have it retain some of that original texturality. I guess just texture is the right word grammatically. Anyways, I might have said this in the last video, I'm not sure if I did, but when you're doing resampling of sounds over and over again, so the fewer iterations you do, the more it resembles the starting sound, and the more iterations you do, the less it resembles it. This is because you lose a bit of character in each iteration. It gets noisier and noisier, and eventually it just kind of sounds like a bunch of washed out noise if you aren't careful to avoid that. So that's kind of one of those things we'll be looking to avoid doing today, but I don't foresee myself resampling enough times to cause that problem. That being said, so we still want a lot of this texture, like this texture. That's why I use a bunch of textured Foley in here. And so if we go over to Harmor, there we are. So if you haven't seen or you've heard of Harmor before, what it is, it's an additive synthesizer from ImageLine. Besides doing a bunch of really neat regular synthesis stuff, it also does image resampling or resynthesis, which is kind of weird. So basically you can dump a sound file into it and it converts it into an image, or conversely you can also dump an image back in here and it turns into a sound file. Because what it does is it can take any image file and make sound out of it. So most sounds that go into here don't look like a very cool picture, and oftentimes some cool pictures in here will sound like utter garbage. But you can manipulate the picture or the image using these various controls, and the way you manipulate the image affects the sound that it turns back into. It's kind of like data bending using Audacity. For those of you who are visually inclined and know about doing glitch art, basically for data bending, you take an audio file, or sorry, you take any file and you turn it into an audio file, and then you do stuff to it, you process it using Audacity, and then you spit it back out as an image. I know I said you can put any file in there, but it has to be an image, any image file. So you go image, audio, and then back to image, and whatever audio processing to it gets translated back into an image, encoding, and now you have a glitched out image. And this is just kind of the reverse. You start out with audio, you turn it into an image, you manipulate the image, and you bounce it back out as audio. So the details of that aren't really that important. I mean, we can explain, if you really want the details, go to ImageLine's website and you can read all about it. It's pretty dank, if I say so myself. So let's if we look over here, we have a long note at root C, and it's the same loop. I'm not sure if you can hear it with all the YouTube's audio encoding, and also just the fact that this is not rendered out lossless. But when you resynthesize something through Harmor, it kind of loses a bit of its top end, like the very high end. That's just kind of an unfortunate loss of using this method, so you should factor that in if you are going to use Harmor. So let's get to screwing around with it. The two most important things are the time and speed controls, because these control like the scrubbing through, and that's what we're going to be doing a lot of here is scrubbing. If you so the time controls like where we're starting from, and if we look at the speed control, that's why we're playing. Controls the speed at which we scroll through. So let's automate these. All right. So let's just put some random crap in here. So let's just make these bigger so we can see what we're doing. Let's want some slower stuff. I don't want this to be so zipping around so much. So this speed. So the reason that it sounds really slow during this portion is because so these points are all kind of near the center. The center on the speed control is basically it's not moving at all, but it sounds all quick here because the time offset is I'm like ramping this, so this is effectively movement as well. So let's just give that like a fat curve there. So. Okay, that's a pretty neat starting point, I say. So, but obviously we can do way better. We can do way better. So, if we change, so these, the level and frequency controls here basically control the way that the resynthesizer engine interpolates the level and frequency between pixels. I can't pick one of these and like kind of intuitively know how it sounds. I understand conceptually what they do, but I don't have like the ear for hearing in between each pixel and all that. I'm not a like I said in my last video. I'm not a DSP calculator genius in my mind. So you can leave it as default, or you can kind of pick a random one. It'll have like subtle differences for the level. Like it doesn't really matter too much. The frequencies are where things get interesting. So you have all these different types. Again, you can read about all these on ImageLine's website. For the top control, it doesn't actually matter too much which one you pick. But on the bottom one, it has a bit more of an effect. I'm gonna pick Unison. I can't tell you exactly what it does, but I know it sounds pretty cool. And let's actually give this a bit of a Unison. For kind of more metallic textures, I like the Hertz detune mode. And so it does it on like a frequency ratio like basis, not on the order of harmonics or the semitones or whatever different types that these all do. So let's turn the pain down a little. We want some phasing, and so we want it to interfere. If we bring them closer together, there's less stereo separation, but there's also there will be more destructive interference. That's the word I'm looking for. So we can actually automate the detune amount if we want to. And we do want to, as a matter of fact. So, and then what we're gonna do is changing this to Unison sounds neat, but it sounds even cooler when we ramp up the formant mix and we throw the formant around and have that moving around. if you have like a really formanty thing you're resampling, like someone's voice, this will, it'll detect that formant and modify your sound accordingly. But we don't really have a formant in here, which is kind of cool because it doesn't really, if it doesn't detect one, it's kind of doing all sorts of wacky stuff to it because it's trying to recognize something that isn't there. So we're all about doing things wrong here and, breaking programs and breaking noises and, doing glitch. That's what we do. So let's do some glitch. Let's just make this all screwy and, it's all fucked up. Here we go. So let's just see what this sounds like. That sounded pretty dope. Let's put some slide notes in here. So when it comes to glitch, you have to kind of keep in mind where in the spectrum your sound is sitting. So if you here, let's close this guy. Let's put it in the mixer so that we can actually shove an EQ on it. So let's just take a quick look at how we're looking in the spectrum here. So when you're making glitch sounds, you have to kind of keep in mind where in the spectrum you want your most of your content to be happening. Do you want a bunch of rumbly stuff happening in the low end? Do you want really crispy, chippy sounding stuff in the high end? Do you want really kind of stuff that moves around in the mid range? You want a bit of both? You want stuff that's kind of all over the spectrum? These are things you kind of have to think about a little when you're making your glitch sounds. And so part of that is just what sounds good to you, but it's also think about if you're making a song, where in your song do you have space for these glitch noises? Are these glitch noises just little accents on the top to add some texture to an otherwise not so glitchy song? Are you making some really neuro hitter that is really all broken and you need a bunch of stuff in the mid and low range that can complement your basses well? Are you layering this on top of something else? These are things you need to keep in mind. It depends purely based off what kind of music you're making and what kind of artist you are. So for this, I'm gonna try and focus a bit more on having some high end stuff here. But we'll try and get plenty of good mid range stuff out of this too. So when we're doing some slide notes here, let's actually make those slide. We want those to be sliding, if we want the high end stuff, let's have it sliding up and then going down. If we, as we want it lower. So let's just kind of pick some regions and see what happens. Let's have one go low here. We don't want to go too low or else it just sounds like muddy garbage. That we probably can't use later. Okay, so let's see how this sounds. And it might sound good, it might not. So mostly cool. These two are too high though. We start losing content. It gets all pushed up in here, and then it loses its definition because the higher it goes, it has kind of less space to move. Okay, it's a pretty damn good place to start, I'd say. So let's before we resample that, let's what else can we do in here? Because Harmor is bonkers. Let's put some distortion on there. What kind of let's see what so there's all sorts of different types of distortion. This isn't a video about distortion, so I'm not going to go into these types, but we want something that'll add some higher content and some kind of interesting texture on top without really ruining the sound. So let's try some sine crush, see what happens, and let's turn the filter up all the way to keep as many of our high end harmonics as we can. Okay, that's subtle but nice. Let's try sine crush. Wait, where are you doing that? Try bit crush. crush is cool because it it adds a lot of like fuzz on the high end. I mean you're degrading the integrity of your signal, and so you can get that kind of like broken sound that's like stereotypical of what we conceive of as glitch. Like it sounds like it's an audio file being destroyed, and we can want that. I'm kind of debating whether I want to do bit crush or something else. Because I don't want to ruin too much of my high end right now this early in the chain. Let's just go with sine crush for now. We'll do some bit crushing later. Let's throw a compressor on here. This doesn't really allow you a lot of control over the stuff like the ratio and the threshold and all that, but or the really any of the attack and release times. But let's just kind of squash it a bit. So just crank that soldier boy. No, not really. Tempted to do it. Yeah, let's put a bit of reverb on there. Here, let's put the reverb earlier in the chain so the reverb is hitting. We want the reverb to go through the distortion and the compression, because if we get those little tails off these sounds, and those tails can end up with a lot of their own texture if we run it through the distortion, and then we can amp those up using the compressor to the point where that it's kind of like its own thing. Let's distortion. So we're changing the order here. So all right. The reverb is now the first thing. Actually, let's put it after the chorus. Okay, so. Okay, that's good, because we don't want like we don't really want like long tails on these things. We want rather shorter tails, and because we're not really looking to have this thing be this like really washed out pad type thing. We're using this to kind of for an accent, and we want like reverb is really good for having kind of like a good like sucky kind of like sucking in and out type of feel to things when you resample it right through compression. So we'll put a little bit of reverb on this layer, but maybe we'll get some more in like a later layer. We'll see. I don't have this video nearly as scripted as the last one. I'm just kind of playing it by ear, so we'll see what happens. One last thing I want to screw with here is the phaser. So let's crank that mix up. So the phaser, let's just see how it sounds. So you'll see we're getting this destructive phasing pattern here. The cool thing about the phaser is that there's kind of this sweet spot. If you're automating it around this like lower range here, you get these really like swashy kind of like ripples going through the sound. So let's we want that, but we don't want it to overpower the sound either. So let's just kind of put some of these down here and see how it comes out. I'm not really retaining a whole lot of the texture from the original samples in here as well as I thought I would, but that's because we're starting with a pretty destructive process, which Harmor is, compared to if we had started with like a granular synth like I did in the previous tutorial. We'd be retaining a lot more of that original sound. But nevertheless, let's carry on. So let's record this in Edison. Let's get rid of the. So this was the original loop. Let's just delete it. Get this bad boy in here. So, alright, it is normalized. Okay, so let's dump this. So, here we have our audio file. So, I covered this briefly in the previous tutorial, but not very well. These sounds, once you get them, it's kind of not so clear what to do with them exactly. I did show briefly that in the last one that I sliced out a little chunk and I saved it to a folder of mine. That's kind of what you do. If you're just having a session that's pure sound design here, you chop and save. Otherwise, if you're doing if you're making a song where you're making all the glitch sound design within the project file itself, what I like to do is have two different arrangements. So I messed up. Normally on the sound design one is where I do all the sound design, then I arrange the song on the arrangement arranger. But it doesn't really matter. I'm not actually going to make a song in this tutorial. So ones that we like out of here, we can chop them out and save them. Maybe we'll go through that process at the end. I don't need to bore you guys with that right now. So what do we do from here? Well, it's kind of hard to go wrong with a granulizer, so let's show this in the granulizer. Make a new pattern. Let's do. We want to do 4 bars? Yeah, let's just keep doing little 4 bar things. So put that bad boy in there. And alright, so if you remember for the last tutorial, we need to enable loop, and we just make an automation clip for all of these. We don't need those to have so much definition. These we do though. So let's just kind of see what happens here. And so one cool thing is that as you get more and more practice using whether it's these plugins or the ones native to your DAW or whatever you're using, you'll learn about little sweet spots for all the various parameters that you're going to be automating and modulating. For the wave spacing or for the grain spacing, there's some really good kind of like at the 25% and the 75% mark. There's some pretty interesting stuff when you have the wave spacing like at a low point. However, if you have the wave spacing at like a high point, those levels for this don't sound as good. It's kind of just an intuitive thing you learn over time, and the more you do this, the more you'll learn it over time. So let's see. Let's just see what this sounds like. Oh, let's just mess with some of these guys a little. Again, these top two, the attack time and the hold time, they affect the sound absolutely, but they're not as important for getting the kind of, destruction we want as these two. Not bad. Let's kind of change this around a little. So let's crank this up a little because it gets kind of granulizer likes to output like 6 dB lower than whatever its input was, which I found a little annoying, but whatever. So let's just amp it up with a wave shaper or a saturation curve is what we're doing here. Dope. Alright, let's... that was really cool. So, a lot of the sounds coming out of here are starting to sound a bit more like neuro basses, which I definitely use granulizers on my neuro basses, and I fully intend to do a tutorial on neuro basses in the future, but this tutorial is mostly going to stay focused on glitch sound design. But the line gets blurred between the two, as, I mean, if you listen to any of my music, you know I really like to play with those two kind of genres and blur the line, so let's record this. Dope. Okay, so there's an insane amount of cool sounds we can pull out of this one. So both of these two already have a bunch of cool sounds in them. And so let's just keep resampling. We'll go back later and cut out what we like out of these. Or I might not film it. Again, I don't want to bore you guys. But okay, so what do we want to do next? Let's put this back into another Harmor, yeah? Generators. So, let's another Harmor. You know, these are in alphabetical order, and I still always have the hardest time finding them. So I have a preset called resynthesizer that I use. I didn't show it at the beginning of the video because the early part of what I filmed got destroyed, but here it is. So the thing about my resynthesizer plugin, I actually have both A and B enabled. A and B are basically two separate instances of the synthesis engine that both get routed together through the effects. They get summed together, then added, or summed and then routed through here. I don't really feel like dealing, because so the tough part is that, like, if you modify stuff in A, it doesn't modify the same stuff in B. You can set it up so that it does, but I don't really feel like futzing with that. I don't mind losing stereo stuff right now, just for the ease of working in mono. I don't feel like dealing with it right now. So let's dump it in. And we have... Sweet. So let's make a new pattern. Okay, another 4 bars. C5, 4 bars. Okay, let's see, what kind of stuff can we do a little different this time with Harmor? We'll do some, I mean, obviously we'll do our screwy time, wacky stuff. Let's play around with that in a sec. Let's get a little experimental. Here, so let's throw these guys around for a sec. Then let's use a hold for these, because when both of these are having a ramp, or basically any part of the graph that has a slope that's not 0, it's basically modifying, like, the fine speed inadvertently, so I don't really feel like dealing with that, so I'm just gonna do these, and that's a little better. Okay, let's see how this sounds. Just let's see. Okay, neat. Let's what we want to do. So it's sounding, we're losing a lot of that kind of high end stuff, so we're just gonna fully embrace that. We're just gonna get like robot swooshy stuff. Let's put in another Hertz detune. So what we're gonna do here, in order to kind of preserve a little bit of that high end, let's what we can do is where'd it go? Oh, here we go. Harmonic unison pitch. So this basically, this is kind of like an EQ graph in a way. It's the spectrum, except this is each one of these like grid lines is an interval of harmonics. Basically, this slider here is getting multiplied by this value, and right here this is like nominal, like 1. So we want to do a little bit of less destructive stuff in the high end. So let's just kind of get rid of that and Let's do that. Neat. Can we get, let's see. Let's see what happens if we do. Now I don't really feel like messing with that right now. That's nah. So we have some cool sounds going. But what can we do a little differently? What can we do from here? Let's So what can we do from here? Let's where's this even coming out of? There we go. So let's put this back in the mixer, and let's put a Valhalla frequency echo. So this is I hinted at this one in my previous video, but this is a delay that has a pitch shifter built into the delay. Pitch shifting, it moves the pitch up, I guess, or correction, it doesn't move the pitch up. What it does, it takes every harmonic of your sound and it moves it up the same amount of frequencies. And what happens is that instead of having it move up uniformly in terms of scale, which should be moving the pitch up, the higher you go in the frequencies, the less it sounds like it's moving up, because as you go higher and higher in octaves, there's more and more frequencies there's a greater span of frequency between each octave, because remember, each octave is doubling the frequency before it. So the jump from 2000 to 4000 hertz is a whole octave, but then from 4000 to 6000 is only half an octave, whereas 4000 to 8000 would be a whole other octave. So it has it'll have a really interesting effect. So let's there's two things we want to automate here. So and if you're not familiar with what I'm doing here, you can, if you want to automate a parameter in a third-party VST, you can't just right-click on it and click on Automate Clip like you would with a default FL native synth or plugin. You need to tweak the knob, go to Tools, Last Tweaked, create Automation Clip. So let's kind of see what happens here. So basically, this control here is the delay. This is the time of the echoes that happen, and then the shift is the frequency shifting of those echoes. Let's put the high cut a little. Feedback, you'll leave the feedback on 50%. Mix, let's leave the mix on 50. Maybe we'll automate that. We'll see. So let's see how this sounds. Let's see. Oh. Please sync. Just leave it to free. Yeah, because we want it in order of milliseconds, because we want all sorts of wacky stuff here. So let's see, feedback. What happens if we up the feedback? Yeah, let's automate that around. Here, we've never put any slide notes in here. Let's do that. Yeah. Hell yeah, it sounds like aliens are talking to us or something. Okay. So record this. Pretty dope. Pretty dope. Yeah, a lot of cool little moments in there. So let's put this back in here. So okay, so we have that. That's another one. Let's do one more. Let's see, yeah, let's do another granular synth. We'll do one more quick granulation of this. Great, I always forgot that happens. There we go. So let's do one more quick granulation, and then we'll play around with some reverb. So. Okay, so take a listen to this. So that's, there's a lot of like kind of low quiet parts in there, but that actually works out perfectly for what I want to show you next. So let's dump that in here. Let's, now let's stick a reverb on it. Let's see here. I like to put the size down a little of the room. I don't want it to sound really cavernous. Let's turn up the high cut so we can actually hear more of that content, because we're not going for like reverb, we're going for just like weird kind of sucky sounding stuff. Turn the wet up a little, maybe the decay up. Actually, no, we don't want that high. Let's aim for 1 second. We'll adjust it as necessary. Let's crank up that stereo separation, so then that way we can get some stereo fun here. Let's see how this sounds. Okay, let's give it a bit of a saturation curve. Let's make a chunk of this saturation curve a rectification, or I guess yeah, that's the right word. Might be, I'm not sure. So let's just do a bit of that. That'll give it a bit of like a fuzz, because it's like hard rectifying until this staircase. Okay, and so let's compress the shit out of that. Here, let's crank that up. Here, we'll crank that up, but turn the decay down a little, because we want the reverb to kind of pop up in between everything else. So let's actually, yeah, no, let's keep that lower. That makes more sense for that. Yeah, so we want basically the compressor to be like sucking the reverb in and out of the foreground, if that makes sense. So let's crank that. It takes every fiber of my being to resist saying "that soldier boy" after saying crank that. Alright, so let's see here. Here, let's up that release time a little. Actually, yeah, let's up that decay time. Yeah, let's actually automate this wet a little. It's kind of, so we know we want it like more up in this little region. This is kind of a quieter area. So let's see how that sounds. Okay, so let's record that. Okay, so let's yeah, let's dump this here. There's interesting stuff there. Let's reverse it. So we reverse it. Actually, you know what? Here, before we do that, let's forget that we rendered that. Let's just put a grow speed on it. Let's see. And instead of, like I did in the last one, instead of using grow speed, reset from that's in Patcher. The yes. And that's the thing, I wanted the grow speed after the reverb, so the reverb's included in that. Let's record that. So earlier I talked a bit about being conscientious of where in the spectrum all your glitchiness is happening. Earlier I was doing a pretty decent job of keeping it like sort of confined to the higher end, but as each iteration goes, I've been kind of drifting more and more towards like the mid-range and like low range. So what we're gonna do, and that's not necessarily a bad thing. Maybe you want that. And I certainly have gotten a lot of cool stuff from that, but I kind of want to bring this a little back up to like the high range. So we're gonna do one last Harmor iteration, and we're gonna try and make sure this stuff all stays like kind of up in the like mids and highs. So resynthesizer, turn off B because I don't feel like fucking with it. Let's dump that bad boy in here. Let's just put that here in case I want to take anything from it later. See where we're in fuckery. Is that where we are? Okay. Hit the space bar on accident. Okay. Put that there. Alright. Okay, and we're just gonna do basically the same process as before. And then we're gonna turn on that unison formant stuff. We're gonna really lean into that. Might change the scale up. You'll see how that sounds in a sec. Let's kind of let's put this on hold. Okay, and then oh, by the way, in my last video I couldn't remember which one of these was the default one. I checked later. It was single curve. That's the default one. So if you remember me being puzzled about that in my last video, I found the answer. So let's get some nice mid-range ones there. Then we'll get some really fast ones. The closer it is to either extreme, the faster it goes, and the closer it is to the center, this parameter, the slower it goes. Down here, it's going as fast as it can backwards. Up here, it's going as fast as it can forward. And then let's get that formant. And then we want Hertz. Yeah, we want Hertz mode because we do. I like Hertz mode. And then envelope the harmonic unison pitch. We don't want it to destroy too much of our high end here. So affecting that scale, all that's doing is affecting the volume, so we don't really need to mess with it. And the scale for here, the image frequency picture scale. Not having too much much of an effect. What happens if we change this sharp thing? Oh yeah, that's interesting. It brings in some of the transients. That's I don't know a whole lot about how this knob works. I'm gonna look into that later. What? Yeah, I'm gonna hold on to that. Let's see then. So we want this to be kind of more on the higher end, remember? So let's do some slide notes. And let's just get this like higher, where like most of this is gonna be kind of happening up there. Let's do a bandpass filter. Not flat hat. What do we want? Let's do rubber. Rubber is really destructive. Because this bandpass is going to take away a lot of. Oops! Oh, I did two of them. My bad. This filter is going to take away a lot of harmonic content, and so I want a really fat, dirty distortion. I want a really crazy distortion on there to kind of bring some of that back, and then we'll use a compressor to do that too. Let's just go burning. Let's just go balls to the wall with this. Oh, I already did that. Huh. Okay. So I want to stay kind of like higher. Not too high. Let's see, and then here, so for our resonance, let's try playing with the noise resonance. It's always got some interesting results. So the reason those really like chippy sounds are happening is because the noise resonance is basically applying a noise. Basically, at the point of the resonance, like the corner frequency of your filter, as it's called in more like engineering terms, it's not like a typical resonance peak. It's kind of scattering things all over the spectrum, and so as we move the cutoff up and down of the filter, basically we're getting points at the edge of this bandpass. I guess it'd be either edge, or maybe it's at this very center. I'm not quite sure how it works with this one, but it's basically scattering a bunch of harmonics around, and it makes really beepy stuff. And so when you change the width and the resonance on the resonance of the resonance, that's weird, but when you change these two parameters, it changes how that sounds. It has that effect. Okay, and so do we want rubber on there? Maybe we want to go back to Bit Crush. Let's see. So it's having a problem with when you do bit crushing and you're feeding like a low signal, it has it kind of rectifies it downward in the sense you actually lose a lot of content. So maybe if we had a louder signal, but let's just go back to rubber. Okay, back into Edison. So this sounds cool, but it's not very glitchy. That's because we lost a lot of that glitchiness by kind of standardizing everything with like the filter, or sorry, the formant moving around, and then the this filter is kind of taking away a lot of like the really unique little moments in there, which is fine. So let's just, last step, I promise, we'll stick it in a granulizer. Stick it in a granulizer, and then maybe we'll put a grow speed or something on it, we'll see. So, but we're back in the high end, which is kind of what we wanted. We're back in that realm. And so we use various techniques to achieve that. We want, so we'll want, let's get some more of like the, more going on up here. Too much, too high, too much spacing. That sounds terrible if I'm being honest. Okay, let's just put a wave shaper on it, just for some volume. Then last step, let's put a, there we have it. Let's see, want a little less body. Oh, this is too far. Okay, that's not too bad. So quickly render that. Whoops, wrong button. Why aren't you? Oh. There we go. Okay, so there we have that. So here we have a crap load of different iterations. Let's kind of play through them one by one just to get a feel for them again. That one might be my favorite. Okay, so there we have a bunch of different iterations that we can pull from. I'm not going to actually film myself doing that because that'll take way too long, but you get the gist. Basically, you go through, you take the slicer, slice out the chunks that you like, and then you can save them to wherever you want to save them to, or you can even keep them just all in the project and then use them in your song. This tutorial ended up a lot longer than I thought it would. I got pretty carried away, but as you can see, there's it's as I said in the last video, it's very much like a conversational practice. You input what you want into the computer, and it responds back at you with something that you can expect to you can predict a little bit of what it's going to sound like, but you don't know exactly, and you kind of have to like work off it based off of what you're given. And so you saw a lot of that here. We just got a lot of progression moving from one to the next, where we got a lot of really cool stuff here, and then it started veering off in a direction I wasn't too pleased with around this iteration, which, I mean, it was cool, but there wasn't quite enough of like that kind of high end stuff that I wanted. So I was able to bring it back a bit with this one. More happening in the high end. But it kind of goes to show you that things don't always go where you want them to, and sometimes it can be happy accidents. Like, I wasn't expecting to get a lot of the crazy robot sounds out of this one that I did, and then sometimes it kind of doesn't. But that's the thing. That's kind of how you got to approach it. It's all a matter of experimentation. It's all a matter of trying to do things differently than you normally would, and just seeing what happens, because you never know when you're going to get like a happy accident. But yeah, hopefully this was useful for you and for everyone watching it. You can this was a very, again, Harmor centric tutorial, and it was, I combined a lot of techniques with that I showed in my previous video. But even if you don't have Harmor, I really hope that a lot of this stuff was useful to you in such a sense that you can replicate it with other plugins that you have. Stay tuned for the next video I want to do, which is going to be more about actually sequencing already made glitch sounds into a musical context, which, now that we're armed with enough basic knowledge to get some crazy glitch sounds, we can actually start making something we can call music with it. So stay tuned, and if you sat through this whole thing, I really applaud you. Thank you for watching.